Ready to go? All right, let's get started. Welcome to the final session. You've made it to the very end. I hope you all have had a great time here in Denver. One of the things, first of all, I'm Eric Escudero. I'm the Director of Communications for Denver's Excise and Licenses Office. We're the lead coordinator as far as marijuana policy, and we are at the Business Licensing Office. And one thing you probably heard us talk about throughout this entire session is that coordinated approach and how important, at least for the city of Denver, it is. And an arm of that, we talk about how it is regulation and education and prevention, and a very, very important part of that there's three legs that makes marijuana management successful is enforcement. And so we're really excited today for this final session for the enforcement against illegal operations in cannabis impaired driving, and having some great gentlemen here who, some of them come from a long ways to talk to you and pass along their insights. They're going to kind of give you an idea as far as what they're doing in their markets, and then we're going to have a little Q&A, just us up here in front, and then we're going to open it up to you, the audience, where you could ask any question you want, but no donut jokes. That's not allowed when the police are here, okay? Just so you know. One thing I'd like them to know is get a little idea as far as who the audience they're speaking to. So I'm just curious, how many law enforcement people are here? Raise your hand if you're in law enforcement. Most of it probably looks like, 65% or so at least. So all of you, we're welcome. What I want to do is, first of all, just talk to you who's going to be talking to you. We're going to start. We have a couple of representatives from here in Colorado who've seen from the beginning of legalization of cannabis here. We have Glenn Davis. He is the Highway Safety Manager for the Colorado Department of Transportation. Glenn, raise your arm. Let people know who you are. Number two person we have is Greg Halstead. He's the Lieutenant of Marijuana Compliance Team with the Sacramento Police Department. And then we have Lieutenant Andrew Howard with the Denver Police Department. Fourth, we have Cameron Sardar. He is the Drug Recognition Expert Agency Coordinator with the Los Angeles Police Department, the City of Angels. And then last but definitely not least, one of our friends from Canada, we have Lieutenant Coordinator Patrick Condon. He is the Cannabis Contraband Division for the Quebec Provincial Police. So we're going to get things started with Glenn Davis, the Highway Safety Manager of the Colorado Department of Transportation. Glenn, I'll let you first of all talk a little about what your role is with the Colorado Department of Transportation, then we can go through your slides.
Okay. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right, good. That's me 14 years ago. I was a patrolman for 25 years. I started in 1979. I now work in the Governor's Highway Safety Office at the Colorado Department of Transportation, and my areas of responsibility are impaired driving, standard field sobriety testing, drug recognition, motorcycle safety, law enforcement coordination, police traffic services, et cetera, et cetera. So I have a lot of duties, responsibilities, but I have a real good staff to help me. The reason I show a picture of myself is when I started in 79, there were no roadsides. There were no devices to help officers on the roadways. And in the 80s, this state was having about 450 alcohol-related fatalities. Last year, we had about 166. And in the 80s, we had about 3 million people. So it was really a challenge. And the culture changed, and I think we're going to see a new culture develop with cannabis driving, and we're going to try and change it before it develops. Colorado definition of DUI, it only has a few elements. A person in the state of Colorado operates a vehicle or motor vehicle if they're impaired to the slightest degree, or if they're under the influence of alcohol or one or more drugs. So it's not a real deep definition. There's only been one change since cannabis was legalized for recreational purposes in 2014, and there's a definition of influence, not impairment, but influence by cannabis. It's 5 nanograms or more of delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol per milliliter in the whole blood is a permissible inference that the person was on the influence of one or more drugs. This law came about as a special session after cannabis was legalized. State legislature came back, and this is the definition they came back with. I don't know what science they used. I don't know if they used any science. The challenges with this are, this is a gram, this sugar packet. A nanogram is a billionth of a gram. So if a person is 1 billionth less, are they okay to drive? Well, by state definition, they kind of are. Colorado, the defendant has a lot of insight and a lot of impact to how he's going to participate. He can refuse to take a test. He can take a breath test. He can take a blood test. If it's alcohol dominant And that's what law enforcement's seeing. They're probably going to take a breath test. And if people refuse or take a breath, we have no idea of knowing what they're on. So that's one challenge we have as far as getting the data. Cannabis is interesting too because it's a Schedule I, so there have not been a lot of studies done, and when the studies are done, it's not the type of cannabis that Colorado roadway users have access to. It's to the type of cannabis that they have in the cannabis farm in Mississippi. I would argue our cannabis is very powerful. However, cannabis will dissipate over time. So even if law enforcement arrests somebody, and if they do not test them rapidly, they're really not going to have a good idea of what the impairing substance in them was, where alcohol has a known way that it breaks down in the system. Also, we don't have a big number of people to test from. In the 80s, this state was arresting 45,000 people for DUI. Last year, there was about 20,000. That's a very small number of the actual impaired driving events, but we only have a number about 20,000. And out of that 20,000, only probably about 17% were tested for blood. So we do not have a big number to test and get our baseline from. We do have one data resource that we're real happy with. It's Colorado State Patrol. In Colorado, the State Patrol mission's very closely aligned with CDOT. It is a traffic safety organization. They're highly trained. They have more drug recognition experts than any agency in the state. Every one of their troopers is trained in ARIDE, Advanced Roadside Impaired Driving Enforcement, and they're showing us about 17% of all of their DUI arrests have an element of cannabis. So we're probably using that as kind of one of our baselines. Colorado State Patrol arrests about 20% of all the DUIs in the state. And the data that we come back with, this is one chart that shows the number of people in fatalities with cannabinoids, and it's breaking down into cannabinoids plus THC plus alcohol. CDOT wants to kind of thin this down a little bit because my responsibilities go by the state definition. And all of these slides will be available. So this is really the slides that we're looking at. I am concerned with the number of people that have Delta 9 5 nanograms or above in their system. These are our fatalities. We have a definition of influence for alcohol. It's 0.08 and above, and that's the numbers that we're accountable for NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety, so we're going to use the same state definition. The challenges will come sometimes depend on the readers of the data. There's some organization will say, oh my goodness, there's 139 fatalities relating from drivers that had cannabinoids in their system. That's true, but cannabinoids in and of themselves are not active, so we're sticking to the Delta 9 THC. That's CDOT's chart. I want a nice, clear, crisp chart. And in 2016, we had 52 fatalities where the driver was 5 nanograms or above. And in 2017, we had 35. That's not a lot, but that's a lot of people. I mean, that's still a lot of people. And that's not the number of drivers. That's a number of fatalities that resulted. So if we had one driver that was 6 nanograms and he hit a school bus with 8 people, that's 8 fatalities out of it. That's only 5% of the state total. We have about 600 fatalities a year. Alcohol's about 27%, but we're just starting to find our baseline. The lessons that we learned when this was legalized, find a baseline. There is a baseline somewhere, and when you legalize, people are going to want to know what it is really quick. Identify the barriers. We didn't have, every officer in the state was highly trained. We did not really feel that every agency in the state was really highly involved in traffic safety. It comes down to law enforcement leadership. There's a city just north of Denver called Loveland. They had a new chief and their DUI arrests increased 100%. There's not 100% more people driving impaired or high there. They have a chief that expects that from his people. So it comes down to law enforcement leadership. It comes down to getting law enforcement trained and getting them motivated. It's taking advantages of the environment. This state was, I think, really behind in data for a while. Washington was way ahead of us. We've caught up with them within a couple of years, and all of that research and that staff was paid for by marijuana cash tax funds. When marijuana legalizes, it generates a lot of money. My office gets about $2 million a year of that money for training and awareness, and the research and the data that comes out was all paid for by that marijuana cash tax fund. We have to find ways to reach our audience when we want to get data. That arrestee number is pretty small, but we do have access to a lot of people that partake. And We do focus groups with them. There's a significant group of people in the state of Colorado that use cannabis and feel they drive better. That's absolutely not true, but that's what's in their heart, and that's what they feel. So we have to kind of go to that standard. We may never reach some of them. And also we have responsibility to the people that don't partake, roadway users, to have awareness coming out soon. We had awareness commercials out in 90 days when we legalized because the public expected it. We have a position or a theory or soundbite for whatever the results are. If they are high, we have got to do more work. We've absolutely got to more work. We got to reach this audience. If they are low, good, people are getting the message. But we have to have a quick soundbite no matter what the data is. Colorado's goal is to create a new social norm leading the path for the U.S. Again, in the 80s, when I started, there's no roadsides. If you were DUI and you didn't hit anything, I was instructed usually take people home or take them to the Waffle House and drop them off. When MAD got hot and the fatalities are going through the roof, the world changed. Standard field sobriety testing started. Express consent started, where people, if they're over a certain limit, it took their license away. That really changed alcohol from 57% of all fatalities to where it is now in Colorado, about 26%. We want to try and change that culture, create that culture for people that use cannabis and keep it as low as we can. Some of the awareness we do, it's all paid for by marijuana cash tax funds. We need to talk to the users, the people that partake. We need to get to them in places of sale, places of use. That's where we find out we have the best results with them. That top ad, that's from NHTSA. Marijuana usage doubled among drivers killed in crashes. I don't want to use that because it looks like people that are killed started using more marijuana. I want to use my own type of stuff. I want to reach my own audience in Colorado. So the main thing is set a baseline. If you can use the money, we've never really had a good data system. Now it's hot and everybody wants to fix it, and I'm going to ride that with the money we get to keep making our data system better. If you need any questions or any of these slides, there's my information. And to my next speaker.
Greg, thank you very much. I'm sorry, Glenn, thank you very much. I'm skipping ahead to Greg. Next up is Greg Halstead. He's a lieutenant with the marijuana compliance team in the Sacramento Police Department. Please take it away.
Good afternoon. Thanks for being here and for listening to us. I know it's late on a Friday at the end of a conference, so I'm surprised there's too many people here. But appreciate your attendance. I'm going to talk a little bit about Sacramento's model of just residential enforcement. That's where we've had a huge problem with the marijuana over the last few years, is just indoor residential grows. And so for about a year, I ran one of our 3 teams that we created. I was the sergeant of that team, and then recently I promoted. And so I no longer run that, but I still kind of have a lot of say in kind of the overall day-to-day stuff for them. Just a little bit about Sacramento. I always like to know where my speakers are from and about kind of a little bit about the size of their city and agency when they talk about how they attack issues. So we're about an hour and a half north of San Francisco. Sacramento is the capital. Our population's right around 500,000 in the city limits, and then about 100 square miles or so, and we're right around 700 sworn officers. So kind of what we did is we started to see a huge increase, even before we legalized marijuana, of just violent crime around residential grows, homicides, home invasions, burglaries, and stuff like that. And so we had no idea kind of how many residential grows we had, and so we luckily have a pretty good relationship with our local power company. And so they started pulling some stats for us to try and identify these grows. And what we found is when we looked at pulling power for houses just over 400,000 kilowatts, about 600 houses. And so the average house in Sacramento uses about 500 to 1,000 kilowatts. There's about 3 people that work on our power utility task force that we have with the police department, and they're very, very good, and the computer software they have is phenomenal. And so they're able to tell us within one light how many lights are in a house. And so we know, when we hit it, about how many lights we're going to have, and I've never seen them off. They're always within one light. And so when they say there's houses pulling over 4,000 kilowatts, we know that that's very accurate, and we know that those are probably going to be marijuana grows and looking at the power cycle patterns that they're on. So the other thing we did is we wanted to have a way to go after the owners of these properties. Most of them, no one's really living in, or there's a bud tender that might be there. But a lot of our owners of our properties are in New York and Texas, are kind of our source states. And so our city attorney drafted an ordinance that allowed us to issue a $500 per plant fine for these owners. And so it's not unusual for us to leave an indoor grow and the owner gets a $500,000 civil assessment through the city attorney. It has absolutely nothing to do with the criminal case. The DA's office, our prosecutorial agency, has a different track for if we do arrest somebody. This is merely just a civil ordinance that goes after the owners, and it's been very successful at reducing our crime. So, in our indoor grow. So then at the beginning of the year, we created 3 teams that divided the city. Each team had 4 officers and 1 sergeant, which for us, I mean, it's not a lot of resources for probably a lot of bigger agencies, but for us, we haven't had a narcotics team since 2008 when we had the recession. We completely did away with about 50 narcotics positions, and we have not restored those to this day. So this is the closest thing we have for narcotics enforcement, so which is another reason why our indoor grows were so prolific, because nobody was doing anything with them in the city of Sacramento. So we kind of attack it 3 different ways, voluntary, criminal, and civil. We recognized early on that there was no way we could deal with the number of houses that were indoor grows, even running 3 teams. The teams do about 3 to 5 search warrants a week, so they're very busy. They hit a lot of houses a week, but even with that, there's no way we could get to all these houses. So we came up with a threshold of anything over 8,000 kilowatts would be a criminal case. Those are ones we would do criminal search warrants on. The way we kind of came to that number was our power utility people said, in the city of Sacramento, once the residential house is pulling over 8,000 kilowatts, it dramatically increases the odds it's going to catch fire, and it becomes a danger to the community. So that's why that threshold got set by our power, or with the information we got from our power company. So anything below that 4,000 and 8,000 range was still a significant number of grows, and we didn't really want to just walk away from those. So somebody in management came up with the idea, well, why don't we just send them warning letters and ask them if they'll stop growing marijuana? And I was like, well, that's pretty dumb. They're not gonna listen to that, right? So I ended up eating my words on that. So what we do is we send out a warning letter. It goes to the target address and it goes to the owner, which is often at a different location. And basically tells them, hey, we know you're growing marijuana. You're only allowed to grow 6 plants. The fine that you're subject to is, X, and we want you to contact us immediately and schedule an inspection of your property. We have about 50% of the people we send letters call and schedule inspections of their property within 2 weeks. It always amazes me. We send them out quarterly because that's how we pull our stats, and that many people actually call, and we go out there and do an inspection, confirm that they all have been grows. Sometimes all the grow equipment's in the garage, but the grow is broken down. About another 20 to 25% we know through pulling power stats. They don't contact us, but they shut their grow down within a week of getting the certified letter. And then, the remaining percentage, we go out and we do knock and talks in our spare time and try and take enforcement action on those. I talked a little bit about our criminal, is anything over 8,000 kilowatts we target, or repeat offenders. We frequently will see repeat offenders, people we've mailed letters to 2 or 3 times, they get a criminal case the next time. We seize all the marijuana, all the lights, all the ballasts are taken. That's something we didn't used to do. We used to just take 1 light, 1 ballast combo as a sample because of just storage logistics of all that stuff. We now take all that. We chase the money, so we will do bank seizure orders and bank freeze orders on the people that we arrest and or the owners if we can, so we do track the money. We bring a building inspector to every search warrant we do, so we have a team of building inspectors that do nothing in our jurisdiction but indoor residential grows. And so they're at every search warrant with us. Before we leave, they completely board the house and condemn it because of the electrical, the black mold, and all the other issues that are going on there, which helps kind of it helps stop just the problem from coming back the next week and they start growing again. And then the power company comes out on every single search warrant that we do, and they remove the meter. The civil, again, is $500 per plant. It's strictly handled by our city attorney. Once they get a judgment, they do place liens on the houses, and sometimes now that these owners are getting wise to this fine, they're trying to sell their property before we can get a lien put on their house, so we're kind of fighting them to get to the courthouse sometimes. And then any house that's a repeat offender, or any of our owners that have multiple grows, which is very common for us. We'll have a owner in New York that has 10 houses in Sacramento, and they're all grows. They file basically a civil nuisance abatement on those houses. on the owner, and then they immediately the next day put a lien on the house, so that they can't sell it until we get our money. And so that's kind of the real quick. Who was next for?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. That was really informative. Next up is a guy I get to work with on a regular basis. He puts up with me. He's lucky. I'm lucky he puts up with me, I guess. Lieutenant Andrew Howard with the Denver Police Department. Lieutenant Howard, were you here when, I don't even know, when marijuana first got legalized?
I was.
Yeah, so he's been here since the very early days, and we're looking forward to seeing your presentation. Take it away.
Thank you. That's probably why I have all this gray hair, but I appreciate everybody being here. It's difficult for me to sit still. Thanks to everybody that joined us last night for our fire and law enforcement presentation. Before I really get into introducing myself, I kind of want to talk to you, that would be the wrong way, about Colorado, right? When I first moved to Colorado in 1994 from Los Angeles after graduating college, right, I moved for the Broncos, I moved for snowboarding, and I moved for the mountains. This next slide I'm going to show you is an actual slide that was the cover of the Denver Post, 4/20/2013. I get mixed reviews sometimes when I show it. I get accused of doctoring it, but this was the actual photos from that day of our Civic Center Park. I can tell you that we have come a long, long, long way. 4/20 this year looked nothing like it did on 4/20/2013. But I'll tell you that we really, really learned a lot of things. We learned that the train is coming. And so all of you that were with us last night, we told you that. And for everybody here where marijuana is not legal yet, is there anybody from Utah or Texas here? All right, well, it's coming there too, even though you don't believe it. It's coming to Utah and Texas. So we really, really learned a lot. I learned, and I don't have a pointer, I don't think, but if you put undercovers up there on that top thing to try to see if there's kids getting high like you're ordered to, you're going to have to drive them home. Okay, that's a note to self. You got to remember that. And probably buy them food on the way home. But about me, this is me. I'm the lieutenant in charge of the Vice Trail Control Bureau. I tell everybody I have the best job in the city, and I believe I do. And part of my responsibility is supervising the teams that handle black market marijuana. I have a few detectives assigned to excise and license that relate to the license industry, and I can sit here in front of you and tell you honestly, we have very small amount of problems with the license industry. The major problems we have, like my partner from Sacramento just told you, are the illicit home grows and the black market marijuana. It is still a big problem. We do feel like we're getting control of it in Denver, and the more states that come online, believe it or not, helps, right? If whiskey was only legal in Wyoming, one of us might drive to Wyoming to get it. So I'm not going to say who, but I understand. So the more states that come online, I think that will decrease the value of Colorado marijuana out of state and then therefore decrease the violence. But until that happens, we really have a lot of resources and officers involved in the enforcement. Right now, as part of my narcotics teams, I have 3 sergeants and 13 detectives, and all they do is illegal marijuana enforcement. And most importantly, it's about 95% driven by citizen complaints, okay? So when I first came back here from being in a task force, we streamlined the way complaints were coming in. Because before, if somebody suspected an illegal marijuana grow, they would call 911, and the poor patrol officer wouldn't know what to do. Oftentimes, they would just drive by and look and keep going. So I had this brilliant idea to make all the calls come to our office. That was kind of a double-edged sword. Complaints went from 20 to about 80, and now we sit at about 40 to 60 complaints at all times that we're working. What's unique to that, and we can skip my little bio there, but what's unique to that is before legalization, if a detective smelled marijuana or saw lights coming from a house, it's easy, it's probable cause, right? It's a search warrant. Well, post-legalization, it's a whole different story. We have to now prove that we know without reasonable doubt there's more than 12 plants inside that house. We can do that, and we're very, very successful, but it takes a lot of work. Another thing that I can tell you, out of the hundreds and hundreds of search warrants that I've personally been to, I can count on one hand the amount that actually had the legal number of plants. I actually want to hug them when I see them, like, oh my gosh, you only have 12 plants, I love you. But that is very rare. What we're seeing is 50 plants, 100 plants, and the reason that they're doing that is so they can divert it out of state, right? A pound of marijuana right now, and you industry people can attest, a pound of marijuana right now is probably about $800 in Colorado. And that same pound, NYPD, $3,500, $4,000. right? So think about the markup there. So that's kind of the battle we're fighting right now in Denver, is the illegal diversion. For those of you that are coming online, we like to say things to remember, get things figured out in advance, spend time with the city attorneys who are here, thank you, the district attorneys. Make sure that you are ready to see stuff you never thought you'd see, right? In law enforcement and fire, state patrol, you can only go to so many car crashes or fires or missing children. Marijuana, you're going to see new stuff that you never ever thought you would see, and you're really going to have to learn how to handle it. So make sure you have this collaboration. Obviously, that's what this whole symposium is really about. Make sure you have fire on speed dial, zoning on speed dial, so you're really, really prepared. And why are we doing this? We're doing this to enforce the law, okay? Something you really have to remember, when people voted for legalization, they also voted for regulation and enforcement. So it's our job, whether we like it or not, to regulate it and enforce it. So remember that. Create zoning rules regarding number of plants. That's a big thing. In Denver, for a while, we created a zoning rule to 12 plants. State law was different, but our zoning rule, city attorneys are nodding, I hope, okay, good. The zoning rule really, really helped us. Now it's changed and it's 12 plants statewide. But for a while, we based our enforcement on the zoning rule, so it's really, really important. And that all kind of developed because of citizen feedback. The citizens, even though they voted for legalization, didn't want 100 plants growing next door because they didn't want the associated odors, the lights, the violence, the risk to their families. So that's kind of how you'll start to develop those things. Begin building relationships with city attorneys, first responders. And here's kind of our basic tenets of our approach to marijuana enforcement, right? Title 19, that's our narcotics laws. Strong, effective regulatory enforcement of colorable rules and criminal laws, and then collaborative enforcement and problem solving with agencies and groups. One of our major issues that we discovered was related to backyard grows. I'm sure my partners in law enforcement can attest to this. In Denver, it is completely illegal to grow unless it's in an enclosed and locked structure. That has gone through some legal challenges, but basically there's no backyard grows. And the reason for this is the violence associated. In 2016, we had, and I think I have a slide here, we had a gentleman with a backyard grow, and he put cowbells on his plants as his alarm system. And you guys have maybe seen this in the news. And he woke up at 2 a.m. and heard his cowbells going off, and he looked out his window and saw 2 teenagers stealing his plants, so he pulled out his rifle and shot both teenagers, killed one, and paralyzed another one who's currently at a high school here in Denver. So what we started to do was emphasize, we pushed out a campaign, I'll show you the video here in a minute, and we started to emphasize enforcement on backyard grows. I had my sergeants, my detectives, prioritize those complaints. So if we had 20 complaints on indoor grows and 1 on an outdoor grow, we did the outdoor grow first because of the violence. I'm happy to say that so far in 2018, we've had no reported violence of any associated outdoor grows. So that's been a big win for us. Residential grows still, there's one of the detectives in the outdoor grows, you can see him there in his little outfit. Indoor grows, we see a lot of them in detached garages in Denver. A lot of the Denver squares have a garage sitting in the back. We see a lot of those with dozens and dozens of plants. I'll kind of speed through this here because I know I'm short on time. These are all pictures we've taken here in Denver of grows. That's the homicide I spoke to you about with you can see the cowbell there on the right side. And the number one narcotic complaint right now in Denver, number one out of all drugs, is illegal marijuana cultivation. So you ask, why does the police department put so many resources into this? Is because the citizens are complaining about this, and it's really a quality of life issue. I really hope, and I'm starting to see, and I should knock on wood, I'm starting to see it kind of peak a little bit in all the years I've been there. Our complaints are a little down. I think our education is working. I think citizens are learning that they can call, and we'll go talk to the neighbors, see how many plants they have. The whole hiding in plain sight that people have been doing for years in Colorado since legalization, I think people are catching on to that. So I really hope that we're starting to see the end of that. Blows through that. So citizen complaints in 2017, we investigated about 184. And that's a lot for 13 people. That's a lot because an investigation is usually pretty in-depth. It involves, like I stated earlier, some kind of in-depth type of investigation techniques. 11 hash labs investigated this year. In the state of Colorado, it's illegal to do any type of extraction at home, right? Obviously because of fire. Hopefully you saw Fire's presentation. I'm sure they talked about that. But obviously that's really, really a big concern. And we've had definitely some explosions and injuries over that. 80 active complaints, that's off right now. We'll kind of skip that one. This is really the key, and I had to put a picture of Marley and Molly up there just for fun. But really coordination is the key with the city, with the state, with other agencies, with the fire department. I used to joke that when I first came on the job, the only time we'd be with firefighters is if we were boxing them for charity. We used to call them smokers, right? Now we have each other on speed dial. Now it's a great collaboration. When I first started in the marijuana team when I was a sergeant, Glenn, but on the medical side, before recreational, I remember standing in the basement of a house with 200 marijuana plants, and I was standing in water, and I looked down, and there's electrical wires running through the water. I'm like, well, this probably isn't a good idea. I probably need to call somebody. I actually called 911, and of course I'm a cop, because I didn't know how to get hold of the fire department. And that is a true story. We laugh about it now. And it seems funny, but that's how it was, and that's probably how it is in some states. Now, we usually have the fire department with us at the beginning, because they're testing the air, they're making sure the environment's safe, they're making sure the home's safe, they turn the power off, if it's a duplex, they're making sure the neighbors are safe. So really, it's just something we've learned, and hopefully you all that are coming online can learn from our mistakes and our pauses that we had and kind of pick up where we are now. In closing, let me kind of show you the education video, and this is something that Eric and I have been working on with education, and really it's key, right? Not only do you need to educate your police officers, you need to educate your citizens, all right? I don't buy it anymore, to be honest with you, now that we're 6 years into it. When I go to a house and they have 200 plants and they go, I swear I thought it was legal. I'm not falling for it anymore, right? Maybe 1 year, 2 year into it, I fell for it. I don't now, but it's still our responsibility to educate. How do you think I get that 3 neat?
Thank you very much. The thing about Lieutenant Howard is, because I've had a chance to work with him, some of the little biases, I think one day when he retires, he should write a book because the stories he's had since you started here, I can't imagine. But so we went from Colorado to California, back to Colorado to Denver, and now we're going to go back to California. We're going to talk to Cameron Sardar, the drug recognition expert, agency coordinator with the Los Angeles Police Department.
All right, so again, like him, it's hard to sit still, so I'm going to stand up for this one. So I'm with Los Angeles Police Department. I'm the DRE agency coordinator. I've been there for about 14 years now. There's one slide before this, but so basically, with recreational cannabis coming online in Los Angeles, it was voted on in November of 2016. However, like many states, it takes about a year to get it ramped up and going. So we didn't have recreational sales until January of 2018. We have had medical since about 1996. So we've had a lot of experience with cannabis. Recreational, obviously, is a slightly different beast, and we're coming to learn that now. So some of the things that we've seen and done with LAPD, there's actually a bunch of slides before this we're missing. So what have we seen in LAPD? I'll do that before I get into this. We've actually seen a huge lack of education, not just within our public, but within our own ranks in the police department. There's also a serious lack of education within our city attorneys, district attorneys, and magistrates, as far as understanding the laws and how we enforce those laws. So really one thing that we've had to do is do all-encompassing training. Everything from sobriety tests, testing schools, including your city attorneys, your toxicologists, getting your DAs out, and also involving your community leaders and getting them out and having them participate as well. So that's one thing that we've noticed, is there a lack of education. We've also noticed that with the increase of DUI drugs, we've actually seen a decrease in DUI alcohol. Since about 2013 to about 2017, we went from about 14,000 DUI alcohol arrests in our city to about 7,000 DUI alcohol arrests. During that same time, we've actually seen an increase in DUI drugs. During January to June of 2017, which is before any recreational sales were supposed to be occurring, to January of June of 2018, we saw a 32% increase in DUI drug offenses in our city. Now, one thing for those states that haven't come online yet with recreational cannabis to consider is that legislation about having a separate charge for DUI cannabis versus other drugs. Currently, we have a DUI drug charge, but we cannot say if it's cannabis or related based on that charge. So how do we know if it's cannabis related? Well, that comes down to the agency. You can look at your forensics labs. What is the blood showing? We are a blood state in California, so if you are driving under the influence and we believe it's drug-related, you are required by state law to submit to a blood sample or a blood test. Now, we used to have criminal enhancements for refusing that blood test. Recently, just a couple months ago, they took that away, and it's now only administrative penalties if you refuse that blood test. With that getting out, we've seen an increase of refusals. With it also being a blood state, we have to get that blood. And as it was touched on, that Delta-9 THC, the active ingredient in the cannabis plant causing that psychophysical impairment, it dissipates fairly rapidly in the body. Cannabis, we like to compare it to alcohol. As far as it being legal in possession, that's great. But the way it works in the body is completely different. And I'm probably preaching to the choir because I saw a lot of law enforcement. Out of everyone here that was law enforcement, do I have any other DREs? One. All right. So and that actually illustrates another point. We have a serious lack of DREs, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the way that the cannabis works in the body, we know alcohol. Alcohol is a very well-studied drug. It actually gets distributed through the water of your body, right? It's hydrophilic. Cannabis is lipophilic, and it goes to the fat in your body. Completely different. With alcohol, we know it goes to the water, and we know men and women have fairly similar or steady water percentages. Different, but steady. We can have a prediction of that breakdown of that alcohol in that person's body. Cannabis goes to the fat. We see different impairment associated with that as well. We see more of a mental impairment with some physical. Whereas with alcohol, we see much more physical impairment. Understanding these differences, understanding how that blood is necessary to capture that evidence, closest to the time of driving presents a big hurdle. Because I don't know, my department's not going to let me go stick somebody with a needle and get blood at the side of a road. So without doing that, we have to get them somewhere to actually have that blood collected in a timely manner. And that's been another hurdle. Because while you may have that 5 nanogram, which has really no science to back it, what happens if it takes 3 hours to get to that blood draw, and that doesn't represent what was in their body at the time of driving 3 hours ago? So there's a lot of hurdles that have to be worked out if your state's going recreational. On that same thing, warrants. With more refusals, do you have a warrant system in place? We developed a one-page warrant for our officers because if you know anything about cops, if you make it easy, they'll do it. If you make it complicated, it's not going to happen. So we made a one-page simple warrant. It's a quick warrant. We actually got it down so that you can have that warrant sent to your DA and sent to you, signed by a magistrate now within 30 minutes. And that's something that should come actually down in time as well. And we're working on making it available for all police cars to do it just from your squad car. You don't have to go anywhere else to do it. But having that system in place to support your officers in the field is very, very important. So with these hurdles, what have we done? One of the things we did about 8 years ago was we did a roadside sobriety or a screening tool test with the Draeger for oral fluid. That was 8 years ago. That was a long time ago. We actually saw very good results from this. We saw about a 99% correlation between what the Draeger said as far as being present and what the blood said was being present, as well as the officer and the DRE doing the test, back supporting that. The way we see this rolling out in the future is this is not your end-all answer. This is not what's going to determine someone's impaired or not. And any agency that is going towards this should know this is not the quick, easy solution. There is no quick, easy solution. The solution is well-trained officers on the street. This tool is to be used to support those officers' opinion of impairment and not to determine impairment. Just because cannabis is present in someone's blood or oral fluid does not mean they're impaired. And it should be the officer's determination of that. What we also do with this machine is we blinded the officers from the results. We feel it's very important. This machine will print out a receipt that shows what drugs were there. We don't want our officers to know that. We want them to make an independent determination of that, and we don't want that to bias a DRE's opinion during the evaluation. So we blinded it. The machine knows, and the records will be sent to the court that shows what was there, which should support the officer's opinion as well as the DRE's opinion, and should also be backed up by the blood result. Again, streamlining that warrant system is crucial, making it easy. We got phlebotomists to come out to all of our checkpoints. Now, obviously, we don't have phlebotomists with us in the car all the time. So at each of our 3 major jails, we have doctors and nurses that'll do our blood draws. But if we're at a hospital, we've actually noticed with the increase of blood draws being done, we've also had an increase of nurses refusing to do those blood draws. Even if the subject is willing to give blood, the nurses are refusing to do it because they don't get paid to go to court. So we now have a phlebotomy service that can actually respond within 30 minutes anywhere in the county to those hospitals to do that blood draw. And that's also something that's necessary to kind of be put in place. For our prosecution, we have now 4 DUI drug vertical prosecutors. They will handle the case from filing all the way through trial. And it's crucial to have that. We have a good relationship with them. They attend our DRE schools. They take the class as well as come back and teach those classes. Our DUI alcohol attorneys attend all of our alcohol schools as well. Our toxicologists, they also come out and attend our DRE training. It's really important, going back to this, it's really important to get your prosecutors and your toxicologists all on the same page. It's one thing to actually see a report and see some marks on a paper and some writing you probably can't read anyways, but it's a whole nother beast to actually be there and see that live impairment, and then take that information back, your own notes, and have that blood sample run and go, oh, 3 nanograms, 10 nanograms, 20 nanograms, yeah, I saw the impairment at those levels. And then as a toxicologist, to be able to testify from experience versus just running samples. So that's very crucial to do. Some other things we've done is education. There's obviously a huge need for education, and we're way behind the ball. Unfortunately, it's brought up in Colorado, you guys use a lot of your money from the cannabis tax to actually pay for this. We don't. We've anticipated about over $180 million to be collected in taxes. We've collected a little over $30 million in taxes from our cannabis sales. With that, we don't have the money as a department to fund all the education for everything. But what we do is we do send out DREs to schools to try and educate multiple levels of schools, so colleges and grade schools. We try and get out there to really hit home this education. And using your different school resource officers, getting them out there, training them up on it, training even teachers. There's a program where we train teachers on this drug influence, get them trained up so they can pass on the knowledge. We also train the Department of Child and Family Services. Kids are being placed in homes, foster homes. Is that a safe environment? Are there drugs being manufactured there? Are drugs being used there? How do they recognize it? So we train them on how to recognize certain paraphernalia so that they know if that environment's safe or not. We work with AAA to make this flyer, and I have some up here, both in English and Spanish if you want to look at it. But because we don't have all the money to do this, we made partnerships with private agencies that do have more money than we do. And they also have a goal of decreasing DUI and DUI drugs because of the insurance cost to them. So making those partnerships and having them print this at their cost is great. We hand these out at all of our checkpoints now. And the back of it talks about the money, right? Even if you may not care about driving high, you may care about the financial impact it has on you for that following year. So coming up with those partnerships, handing these out at checkpoints, getting these in dispensaries may even be a great idea. We're involved, as was mentioned earlier, cannabis, it's hard to study because it's still a federally illicit substance. So we're involved with a study that's going on in San Diego right now through our Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research. It's the highest THC ever studied in a government study. We're currently at 13.5% THC as the high dose, and the low dose is about 6% THC. And obviously there's a placebo. It's a double-blind study. The person ingests that cannabis. They then do a driving course, a simulator, and then they are subjected to the sobriety test and a modified drug evaluation. We then come up with an impairment opinion, whether we believe they got a placebo or live drug, and would we arrest that individual. That study's ongoing, so I don't have the results. It's been about 2 years now, and we probably have 1 more year left. But it goes to show that, as was mentioned, studying cannabis in most research centers, 2 to 3, maybe 5%, versus what's used in the street, 30 to, say, 90%. It's like studying O'Doul's versus, your moonshine. Same drug, a lot more potent, and completely different clinical indicators as a drug expert that we'll see. The evolution of cannabis, we've seen the body change in response to it. Everyone thinks it's a downer, right? Your heart's going to go down, you're more relaxed, but it's the exact opposite. blood pressure skyrockets, pulse skyrockets, your pupils dilate. It actually mimics more of your stimulants like cocaine and meth in the body than any other drug, the way it affects your heart. So the other things we've done is we looked at our education blueprint. If we can't get into every school and teach, let's affect the standards for our education board and what's being taught by the teachers. So we reviewed them and updated their drug information, alcohol information, so they're giving out the most accurate information. And this is just kind of outline some of the difference. We do still have medical. This is kind of the differences between the two. Obviously, medical is 18, recreational is 21. Possession amounts are different. And honestly, if the idea behind having all these different laws come out was to confuse officers, they've done a good job. A lot of our cops, they do the stop and they see weed in the car and it's like, I don't know what you got. Have a nice day, right? And really, when you think about it, we have one law just to illustrate how confusing it is. If you have recreational cannabis in the car, it has to be in the trunk, right? If I have medical cannabis in the car, it can be in the front with me. Now, to break that down even further, if I have recreational cannabis and it's been opened, like an open container like beer, that's a violation. Even if you close it when we walk back up, that seal's been broken, it's still a violation, you'll be issued a citation. Medical cannabis, if I cracked it open and then I see the officer walking up and I close it again, well, as long as you present to us your medical rec and you tell us it's medicinal, no violation whatsoever, even if the seal's been broken. So when we start breaking this down, it kind of becomes confusing. And really, why do you need medical cannabis in the front opened with you anyways? It should have the same standard. But it is kind of confusing. And these are all the stuff that was supposed to be in the beginning. So, I'm going the wrong way. All right, so that's it. And next is you.
1 second, I wanted to just introduce you properly because one of the things that's been pretty neat about this whole thing is hearing the different challenges you guys have, different laws, whether it be education, whether it be how the law is different. Now, our next person coming up here has a whole different challenge and a whole different, because we have obviously federal prohibitions still in the United States, but in Canada, how many weeks has it been? 2 weeks ago, Canada federally legalized marijuana. What's that like to be law enforcement there? And to tell us, we have Patrick Condon, the Lieutenant Coordinator, Cannabis Contraband Division, Quebec Provincial Police. Take it away, please.
So I'll stretch a little bit too, thank you. So as you'll quickly notice, English is not my first language. So if I create new words, that's possible. We call it Franglish back home. So I'm one of those French Canadian that nobody knows about it. So I do my best. Just if you don't understand, we'll try to figure it out. So yeah, so I'm lucky enough to be in charge of the new unit we're putting in place with the legalization of marijuana. Within the Sûreté du Québec, that's the provincial police in Quebec. We're placing in new units that looks actually like yours, guys, that I heard. So we're gonna fight against the black market of marijuana. So you just said it, 2 weeks. So October 17th, that's 2 weeks ago, it's now legal. What I wanted to show with that is how quickly we needed to adapt with the federal legalization. Only since June, we knew the final outlaws of the regulations. Like the final assent, the royal assent, they got it in June 2018. Legalized October. So that's really, really quick for law enforcement to adjust our way of working. So that's one of our main issues we had. I'm trying to go faster so we can ask more questions. So what does it look like, what we're working with? So yes, federally, now they removed the cannabis from the CDSA, that's the Controlled Drug and Substance Act. Actually, they removed it, legalizing the possession and sharing between adults of 30 grams. And then they're in charge of supervising all the productions level. So all the legal productions for cannabis use now is controlled by the federal. So they provide the licenses. Now there's about 120 producers, legal producers across the country in Canada. Most of them, they were in the medical section before. We have medical marijuana for about 20 years now. So all these are moving towards the recreational now. Then there's the provincial coming in. So all the distributions and sales systems are left to every provinces to decide how they will do that. So what that causes, like in Quebec, they choose to have like a government runs branches and online sales actually. So every stores in Quebec are government runs. So it's about our liquor store that we have. So we already had those government-run liquor stores, and the marijuana is the same. So it's all sold by the Quebec provincial governments. And there's different layers of regulation. Like federals says there's no criminal offense of growing 0 to 4 plants at home. Then the provincial came and said, no, you're not allowed to grow any plants back home. So in Quebec, there's no home grow. So the only way you can get your legal cannabis is to get it in the store or order it online, then they'll deliver it to your home. So that's the only one you can get. In the federal level, there's no limit on how many cannabis you can stash in your house. So with the provincial sells that as an issue, and they've put a maximum 150 grams by dwelling house. So as a law enforcement perspective, that was good. So we thought it was to fight against organized crime. That was one major point we wanted, to put a maximum in a dwelling house. And then all the consumption and the public consumptions and the possessions were there. It's limited and controlled by the provincial laws. As we speak now, like it's legal to have public consumptions in Quebec. You can smoke in the street, on the sidewalks. You can smoke in most parks. That's not an issue. But then comes the municipal. So the municipal, all cities they put another layers of regulations on zoning, and most of them is to limit where you can smoke. So that mix of 3 layers is quite complicated for law enforcement when it comes to which laws, which power I'm using, and when you see somebody smoking in the park. So is that illegal in a municipal way? Is it not? So it's like before it was so easy. Like marijuana smells a lot. You see it. It was illegal. It was a drug. So you just arrest the guy, and that's easy. You have your power to search the guy, everything. Now it's totally different. Even if you smell, you seize it, you need to know, like, are you like in a private place? Are you in a public place? Are you in an area where it's illegal in your municipality? So you have tons of questions to ask before you can actually apply the right level of law. So are you using the criminal codes? Are you using the penal codes? Are you using like tickets on the municipal level? So it's still quite complicated. So what's my new division? So basically, it's 54 new resources that we're placing at Sûreté du Québec all across the provinces that will be totally dedicated to fight against illegal cannabis. So with the program Access Cannabis, that's a governmental program that actually finances all these new units coming from the profit of the legalization of marijuana. So what we do, our main goal is to cut off all the illegal supply, so home grows. We've got tons of outdoor productions, importations. Just as a figure, like last year, 2017 to 2018, we seized in the whole province just a little under 300,000 plants of marijuana. So that's what we seized with just the Sûreté du Québec. So that's a lot of marijuana we're growing back home. So it's a major issue. So I'm pretty quite sure the new unit's going to be quite busy. And we're going to try to disrupt all illegal distribution. So basically, we want to cut off the accessibility of illegal marijuana to the youth, and we want to move all the consumers to the legal market. And we're going to have a section working on online black market. So we're going to be checking what's happening online, just actually to cut off like the accessibility to youth person, to the young person again. So that's about it.
Thank you very much. Really interesting. It's 2 weeks, 2 weeks into legalization, and I'm trying to picture what it's going to be like talking to you next year if we have you back next year and all your experiences, but it's so fresh and such different than our experiences. I'm going to ask these guys a few questions, and then I'm going to take some questions from you guys, but just so I just know, because I'm sure you guys have a million questions, just hold up your hand if you're going to have a question later, because I want to see how many we have. Quite a few so far. So hopefully I can generate a few other questions. But actually, Patrick, since you just got done, I'm going to start with you. You know, and you talked about, you know, some of these challenges, but I'd like to get into a little bit more about, you know, what has been the biggest challenges you've seen so far in this transition? Because you think about it, there may one day be federal legalization in the United States. There may not. We'll see what happens there with our lawmakers. But, you know, as we look ahead and think about that possibility, you know, any advice 2 weeks in that you would give to law enforcement here if that day ever comes?
Yeah, tons of challenge actually. I heard in this yesterday's an expression that I thought was exactly what we were doing. They said flying the plane while it was constructed. I thought it was about what we were doing because we knew the legalization was coming federally. Our provincial government was trying to put their own regulations for distributions and all the distribution systems, but they didn't know what the federal regulation will look like. So they were trying to put the regulation without having all the details. And then we, law enforcement, were trying to prepare our trainings, changing our internal policy, just changing our structural investigations units. Marijuana used to be like under all the drugs and gangs units in charge of all these kind of investigations. Now it's moving to more to a contraband approach, more to a underground economies approach. So all of these needed to change at the same time, the same pace, not knowing exactly what the regulation will look like. So I think we're ready. We'll see next year when we come, if we were. So, but yeah, the challenge is there. And mostly training and educations, like I heard, it's one major point. It's legal now for 2 weeks. I would say most of our agents are not even aware or they didn't have any training on the new laws they need now to apply on the road. So that's a major issue we're facing.
That's very interesting. And the thing about it is, you know, people, when Colorado had legalization, some people call it the grand experiment, but it wasn't federal legalization. So you guys have maybe taken the baton from us and taken over the grand experiment. I'm going to go back to Andrew Howard, Lieutenant Howard from Denver. I wanted to ask you a question. You know, and you talked about some of these things in your presentation, but I want to give you a chance to elaborate a little more since you dealt with this firsthand with Colorado. You know, what has been really, you talked about the black market, obviously your big challenges, but other than black market, were some other major challenges that you guys have faced over the past couple of years?
Besides the black market?
Yeah, anything else?
Sure. One of the things is it's important with legalization of marijuana to take your personal bias out of it. And that goes both ways. That goes for the opponents and the proponents. And it's certainly important for law enforcement. And I said this yesterday, and I say this every time I talk, which seems to be quite often these days. It doesn't matter what you or I think. It's our job, and certainly in law enforcement, to support what the will of the voters, right? And we also remember, like I said earlier, the voters voted for legalization and regulation. So that's what we're tasked with. So that's something, when you supervise narcs that have been doing the same thing for 20 years, you're gonna get some pushback, right? You're gonna get some guys that put their heels in the ground. So really be selective with the people that you select your enforcement teams. And for Canada, really select people that are gonna take their biases out of it and follow the letter of the law, and you're going to be successful.
Interesting, very interesting. I wanted to turn this over to the Sacramento side of things back, and Lieutenant Halstead, one of the things I thought was interesting, I think I even saw you guys kind of react to this, the other law enforcement on this panel, is when you talked about the municipal fines, $500,000. Has your city had success collecting it? Are you guys actually getting paid?
We are, and so we're only 10 months into the ordinance it went live in January. So, and the teams didn't really get up and run until the end of January. So we're at about, right before I flew out, $50 million in fines issued. I think of that, we have settlement agreements on about 6 to 7 million was the last number. So it takes a while for those to work their way through the hearing process. And we were learning in the beginning, and a lot of these, it's created this whole market of civil attorneys that do nothing but marijuana enforcement now and stuff. And so they were trying to figure out how to fight these ordinances. And I mean, out of the hundreds and hundreds of cases, we've only had one we've lost at an admin hearing. But they negotiate through, you know, some take months, some take, you know, weeks. And so I think until we have probably 18 months worth of data, we really won't know how successful we are on that. And the city attorney's office is looking at how we go after people who have sold their houses and we don't have liens on them yet. So we have several people back in New York who owe us, $500,000+, and they have no assets in California yet. We have a judgment. So our city attorney is actually hiring law firms in other states to go after them in those jurisdictions and seize their assets and bank accounts and put liens on houses. So we've taken a very aggressive approach, but the money coming in, I think, like I said, we're still at about that $6 to $7 million range of money that is settled, but it's still very early to see how successful that'll be, I think.
Interesting. One of the other things, I think it's on a lot of people's minds when we talk about the end of prohibition of marijuana, whether it be states or cities or a country, is DUIs. And that's obviously a concern of everybody, whatever you feel about legalization of marijuana. And so I want to turn it back to our Colorado Department of Transportation and our Highway Safety Manager for CDOT here in Colorado, Glenn Davis. And maybe you could talk a little bit about what has your state DUI task force done to reach the cannabis-consuming public? I mean, are you guys having success doing that?
Sure. The state does have a DUI task force. It's statute mandated, and we have people from the marijuana industry on that by statute. And I think it was really important that we did that. We talked a lot about cannabis and its effects on driving, but they really weren't represented. So having them represented, I think, really has made a difference, because if I need to do outreach, I need to get into the places, point of sale, point of use, and I can't do it without their help. And also, they're very supportive. We don't have primary seatbelt in this state. And we had a seatbelt bill go up last year. I couldn't get support from some state agencies, but I had the marijuana industry group support us because they get it. They're very powerful. They have a lot of money, and it's important that I have them on that task force if I need to get some doors open.
Very interesting. Well, as we're talking about DUIs, I wanted, because I thought one of the things I really enjoyed listening to the presentation by Cameron over here from Los Angeles Police Department was you talking about how things you guys are dealing with, and the laws are different, and it's amazing. You go state to state and you see what they are. Maybe you could talk about what you've seen is the best method to detect DUI cannabis, and at least from your experience so far in Los Angeles.
Yeah, really, it comes down to education. It's training your officers in the field in the sobriety test. It's getting them A-RIDE trained. With Los Angeles, we use a program called IDAP. It's the Impaired Drivers Apprehension Program. It's a 40-hour school. That's our basic DUI school for our officers. That exposes them to the standardized field sobriety test training. It does A-RIDE training, and it does the DRE preschool training all in one. We expose them to 2 alcohol workshops where we dose individuals with alcohol to a certain BAC, have them administer the test, and we require them to be within approximately a 0.02% accuracy determining of their BAC without the use of a machine. And in doing this, we get well-trained officers, and we all know that DREs, it's far and few between. It's a lot of extra work at no extra pay. And so if you give your officers the basic school, incorporate drug training into that, now they're out there and they detect that drug impairment. That's when they know when to call a DRE, or they have enough training to at least document some of the basic indicators of influence of that drug, so that when it goes to court, they can get a DRE to come and testify on the officer's behalf and based on what they documented as an expert onto what drug may have been causing that impairment. So it's really just about educating your officers in the field and giving them that base level training to be successful.
I want to stick with you and ask you another one, since we're talking about impairment. Have you talked a little about this, it was really great to hear the testing that you guys are doing, because there just is not enough testing. It's something we've talked about in Denver, as we're hoping to see the federal government. Our mayor is working to get the federal government to authorize more testing so we can help you guys out and understand health effects and so on. But with the increase in potencies, have you seen an increase in impairment with the people you guys are pulling over?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. As the drug has increased in potency over the years, we've seen a change in clinical indicators. So it used to be with the low-grade THC, the pupil size wasn't affected. As THC has changed and increased, we now have very large or dilated pupils associated with that. In addition, we've seen higher and higher pulse rates with some of the edibles as well as THC acid. We're seeing pulse rates similar to cocaine and methamphetamine, just 160 beats per minute, very high pulse rates. We've also seen a change in the body temperature, and this has not been currently, it's not studied per se yet, but of a survey of 302 DRE evaluations across the nation, where it was only cannabis, we actually noticed a decrease in body temperature, which is also different than what we currently know. So the drug has changed. It's also caused more impairing effects that are seen in different sobriety tests. So some sobriety tests are more sensitive to cannabis impairment than others. In that same survey, we noticed the modified Romberg was very indicative of impairment, but it wasn't consistent. There was no consistent, everyone had a really slow clock or a really fast internal clock. It was either end of the spectrum was supported by the cannabis impairment. The walk and churn was very sensitive as well. The number one indicator we saw on that was an inappropriate turn, or just forgetting to turn altogether, or the inappropriate number of steps because they forgot how many steps to take. So we do see sensitivities in certain field sobriety tests, and we're hoping with this study we'll have a little bit more information to support that.
Well, we're talking on the impairment. I wanted to go back to you, Glenn, with the Colorado Department of Transportation as far as talking about the nanogram definition of influence. I recently had an opportunity to sit down with some Denver Police Department officers, their DUI unit, and trying to learn as much as we can as the regulator in Denver about the DUIs and so on. And it was interesting, the similarities and differences with DUIs as far as alcohol and DUIDs, and what should be considered the definition of influence. I'm curious, Glenn, as far as the Highway Safety Office, the position of them as far as the 5 nanogram definition of influence.
Well, we support that as we support every state law because that's what we're required to do as state employees. We do feel that there may be an opportunity to take a look at that and change and not look so much at a nanogram level because the person doesn't know their nanogram level, the officer doesn't know their nanogram level. It's about impairment. And really maybe taking a look at that. We're going to have a new governor, we're going to have a new attorney general, we're going to have some new legislators. Maybe it's time to look at that 5 nanogram and is that appropriate for the environment? And you're also asking law enforcement to do standard field sobriety testing roadsides, which are the same as they are in Denver, Los Angeles, Sacramento, and in Canada that have not been taken a look at since the 80s. And they're designed to detect impairment by alcohol or inability to do divided attention. Maybe it's time to take a look at that. So yes, we support it as we're required to, but we think it may be good to take a look at that in the future.
Interesting. Now, when I talk to Lieutenant Howard a lot, and he's talked to me so much and taught me so much, and I still have a lot to learn as far as the black market and home grows. And I want to go some time really for all of you guys to talk about that as far as the police officers here. And I want to turn it back over to Sacramento because one of the things I thought, Greg, that was really interesting. You talked about how you guys work with utility companies and how innovative that is. And I don't know if other people, police officers, you guys are doing that as well, but how frequently do you receive information from utility companies on high usage houses, and do they require a court order?
So we have, like I said, a very good relationship with our power company, so they don't require any court order. We do have to send them a fax or an email now, PDF, just with a request and why we need it. So we talk to them daily. I mean, the couple guys that we work with on our task force, I'm talking or emailing or texting them on a daily basis, and they're at every search warrant. So we're constantly getting updated power records, but we pull a list every quarter of high usage power per zip code. And then from there we start sending out our letters and we start our criminal enforcement on new locations. So every quarter we kind of have new stats on high power usage houses. But on a daily basis, we're literally talking to them and dealing with them. And again, they come to every single search warrant that we serve. They're present at. So
it's also a question too about I think who's involved in these these home grows, and I want to turn it back over to Lieutenant Howard from Denver. Maybe you could talk about organized crime and just how much is organized crime involved in the black market marijuana in home grows.
Sure, and that's a tough question. And organized crime is not really like it was maybe when I was growing up, right? At least with marijuana, it's not the trench coats and the black hats and the dark Lincoln Town cars. But we have seen, and you can look up Golden Gopher, as was a case, or Toker Poker, and we have seen some really complex organized crime cases. But what's unique is they've really started with like Toker Poker, for example, started with some kids that graduated a local high school together, and they used to play poker together, and then they just had this idea to start growing marijuana and start shipping it out of state. And that's really how it started, and it turned into an organized, violent organization, but it's nothing that we would have really ever imagined. So, the majority of our illegal home grows, the marijuana is being diverted out of state. And that's not anecdotal, that is a fact, but the majority of that is not involved in the organized crime. We do have it, and it is present, but usually it's somebody that moves here from out of state, rents a home or buys a home, grows plants, and because of the price difference, ships it through USPS or puts it in a car and puts it on a car carrier or drives it back home. That's usually how it goes.
Interesting. Now, with Canada having legalization now, 2 weeks, which, you guys have probably figured everything out because, you've had 2 weeks to study all this, how it affects you. But I'm interested what your black market is like now. I know it's only 2 weeks in, but, tell us about, first of all, Quebec's government model to deal with black market, and then just kind of, have you seen any changes over the last 2 weeks?
Yeah, so, the model for Quebec is what we call the Access Program. So this program actually means it's concerted action against underground economies. So this program existed already for tobacco, alcohol, financials. So these programs are financed by the governments when actually the states or the provinces, the victims. So now with the moving of cannabis to the legalized and being provincial runs stores, so they're now the victims of the black market of selling marijuana. So that's where all the financials comes to enforce this. So that's how my units now is taking place. Otherwise, law enforcement, unfortunately, I cannot say that our priority was on marijuana. All those drugs units have fentanyl, have problems, have cocaine's problems, MDMA, name it. So marijuana was recognized as a soft drugs, not in the priority. So with these programs, with officers totally dedicated to fighting the black market, so it worked well with tobacco. As an example, our contraband level for tobacco, before we started the program, was about 30 to 35% in Quebec's province. That was a contraband rate. Today we talk about to 12% of contraband rate. So that's way lower. That's the lowest province actually in Canada for contraband tobacco. So we're trying to do the same with cannabis. On the second part, like organized crime, we've seen them moving fast actually with the legalization coming. From the last years, we've been monitoring more how they're working, how they're changing their way because we wanted to be ready with the new units and the legalization. So we've seen a lot of those organizations moving towards an appearance of a legal market with the confusions with the legalizations and the lack of education of population. We've seen pop-up stores like on the street stores selling marijuana, using using actually the cover of medical or whatever. But if you scratched a little bit under that, they were selling whatever drugs you needed in those stores. But they were give themselves the appearance of a legal store. You could see there's a lot of fraudulent use too of the medical authorizations that we see more and more often. For in-gross productions, as an example, in Canada, you're allowed to have 4 different licenses in one place, in one house or whatever. If you can rent a space in an industrial area and have 4 licenses for medical productions, one license can be up to 200 plants. So legally, you can grow 800 plants in a warehouse or even in a house if you want. So we see organized crime using fraudulently those authorizations to make big grows of marijuana, and of course this is all going to the black market. So it's more. So they're using all these gray area actually to complicate our works. We need to prove actually that this marijuana is going for resale on the black market. So we can, if we just seize, we just I'm looking for my English word now. If we just like burst the door of that places and he's got all his license, everything there's nothing we can do about it if you don't prove that actually all the products were going to the streets. So that's how they are adapting. And actually we see more and more often in what we see in these places, new products that it's not available on the legal market. So right now you can buy like flowers or oil in those legal stores. But like what we see now, or like on the street, what they sell a lot is all edibles. These little candies, all these things that are really targeting the youth actually. So we see lots and more of those products on the street now that we didn't have like a few years ago. So they're evolving quickly.
I wanted, we're going to open up the floor here just a matter of moments for questions, so be ready. But before we go, I want to make sure we got this question in because you guys' insight's great. I'm going to start with Cameron. I want you guys to just work down. And since we've only got about 15 more minutes left, I want to get this question and then ask questions. For 30 seconds, can you tell us one piece of advice for any city, state that is considering legalization or is just legalized or about to legalize? What would you tell them in 30 seconds, like one most important thing they need to do?
Data. Start collecting data now. Track how many DUIs, DUI drugs, DUI cannabis. If you're trying to increase your number of DREs, how many requests do you have currently? How many of those requests are being filled to show the need? And what are the results showing? Look at your toxicology lab, and you really need to create a partnership with that toxicology lab and your DREs and your prosecution.
How about you?
For me, it's going to be make sure your laws are in place. Make sure you've coordinated with your city attorneys and your district attorneys, and really make sure that when you have a criminal case in law enforcement, and I was speaking to LAPD about this last night, make sure that your district attorneys are going to accept that case filing. So just make sure that you're all on the same page and that you have community support and buy-in with those laws that you create.
And Glenn?
Data. It's important to get that baseline data, have a data system ready to go. Funding, look for funding, because when a state legalizes, there's going to be state costs. And if you don't get in line for the funding, other state agencies are going to get in line before you, and traffic safety could get lost. And it's kind of what Andrew said, is get your laws synced before legislation, because if legislation happens, you're behind. And I'm mostly with traffic. But get your laws synced and get them ready. If you were to legalize in 90 days, what would you want laws to be? Start working towards that now.
And you, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo kind of the same thing, is look at, whatever your state law is gonna be, and then how in your own municipality you wanna restrict that even further or control it more. And, like for us with the ordinance on the illegal growing in your house, the fine has been huge for us in combating our growth, and our neighboring jurisdictions don't like it because now they're suffering, everyone getting pushed out to their areas. But having the forethought to do that ordinance when we went live with it was huge.
And you, Patrick?
Well, come to a marijuana symposium and take notes.
Good advice. I like you. Good advice. Good advice. Hey, I just want to remind you before we open up the floor too that they're taping this here. You're seeing the video, and you're going to get an email that's going to tell you a passcode so it unlocks this. And so when you go home and you want to show this great advice you've got from these gentlemen here, you can unlock that and you can show it to your colleagues, because we want to make sure you pass on this information. So look for that email, and don't forget about the survey that's going to be coming your way later today, as far as hope you'll rate the conference and give us some advice as far as how we can do it better, and tell us things you liked, you didn't like. But who got questions, please put up your arm and we'll direct you to a mic. And please, when you come up to the mic, just give your name and where you're from and what your role is, where you come from.
Thank you very much. I'm Daniel Campbell. I'm with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police out of Ottawa. I actually just wanted to offer some insight on the Canadian perspective on the drug-impaired driving piece. Now, I'm not an expert in this, so my numbers might be slightly off, but basically there are 3 new impaired charges that came into place with cannabis. So we have a low THC, a high THC, which is also your 5 nanograms, and we have a 3rd charge, which is actually a combination of THC and alcohol, because science shows that when they're used together, that the impairment is basically exponentially worse. So I think it's the combined one is about 2.5 nanograms THC and 0.05 of alcohol. So that's something that you can consider if you have any kind of influence in establishing the laws and you want to take a look into that. And I don't know if your data shows, your 35 deaths, THC, how many of those involved alcohol, but it's something you can consider. And then to add to that, for you, Cameron, there's also another mathematical equation in there that if the blood draw is 2 or 3 hours after the arrest, there's a calculation. So for every 30 minutes, you reduce the level of THC, or you add back to it, to get a more accurate representation of what it was at the time that they were actually pulled over. So just something you can look into if you're curious about it.
Any reaction from anyone on the panel, or any?
The only thing on that backwards extrapolation of a THC, there has been a model that's been put forward by Marilyn Eustace. She's the one who does most of our research in the United States and probably for the world on cannabis. And she did put forth a model on that backwards extrapolation. There are some issues with it, and it hasn't been introduced in the court yet, and it's successful in the United States anyways. However, that's the nice thing about with all this recreational stuff coming about, we're finally starting to get some science behind it. So there's definitely studies that are ongoing, and we really look forward to using that information in court because we need it. Absolutely.
Good afternoon. My name's Kimberly Lavo, and I'm also from Canada. One of the things I was going to actually say was what my colleague just talked about. That bill was Bill C-46, if anybody wants to look it up, that changed the impaired driving legislation. But in addition, with respect to the comment from the gentleman from Colorado, with respect to SFST not changing since the 1980s. In fact, in Canada, there has been an addition to the SFST curriculum called Introduction to Impairing Drugs that adds an extra day onto the SFST training to focus on drugs with a specific focus on cannabis. It was developed by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and is used throughout Canada since January 1st, 2017. So, or 2018, sorry. Since January 1st, 2018. So if anybody is interested in that, we could probably get that for you, and if you want to add that to your own curriculum, we can.
Thank you. I'd like to see that if I could get with you after this. Thank you.
Hey, Detective Irby Phillips from Los Angeles Police Department. At what point was law enforcement brought in to give their opinions and insight when you're creating this law for legalizing cannabis? And was that the right time, too early, or too late?
Feel free, someone jump in.
I can tell you from a Colorado perspective, once it was voted on, the governor created an Amendment 64 task force, and there was one representative from Colorado law enforcement. He was the chief of Greenwood Village, which is a pretty decent sized city, and he had the responsibility for everything to come out of that task force. So it was after it was done, and I think those task forces were very heavily weighted toward other interests.
And I would agree, probably get me fired, but law enforcement was a muted voice in that process, sir.
For within the DUI component of that, in California, it passed November of 2016. By February of 2017, they started putting together a task force and do a blueprint for California in Sacramento. But much like what everyone else is saying, it was a little too late. Not enough information was able to get out and actually make an effect. The law had already passed.
Well, on a Canadian perspective, we were on board since the beginning, actually, on the fast track section, actually. But they listened to us. We offered some modification to the regulations in place, especially to give some empowerments to the law enforcement, so they have some tools they can work with the laws they're putting in places. And they listen. They changed the regulation on our advices. So yeah, we were on board with the legalization.
I mean, I would just kind of echo what the LAPD person mentions, that I think we were brought in kind of too late, or at least they didn't listen to us until it was almost on the eve of it all. And I think we're still trying to play catch up and make modifications to how the model that they proposed looks.
We've got about 6 minutes left. Does anyone have any other questions? I'll start throwing some questions at you too, guys, because I want to make sure we get the most of your time. We haven't really talked about education. You know, we talked. You guys, some of you mentioned it in your presentations, and I know Cameron, you talked about how you guys didn't have the funds, but you're still trying to overcome that. Just because I know, because I work with them, I'm gonna ask Lieutenant Howard to talk about it a little bit about the education efforts that you're doing here in Denver.
Well, and that's something that Eric's partnered with us with Office of Marijuana Policy to use some of the marijuana funding and the money to assist us with our education. There's been some pretty robust programs, Know the Cost, and you probably can speak to that better than I if you guys haven't talked about that already. Know the costs or the high costs, or the word is on that. And then for us, really, it's creating unique ways to reach out to people that are actually going to listen, right? That are actually going to see the communication and pay attention to it. So it's something that we are really working through. We're open to suggestions. I know that the Office of Marijuana Policy has talked to outside ad agencies to get some input as well, and actually partnered with one, I believe. So you probably are more the expert in that than I am, Eric.
Well, it's still great to hear your education, but I also want to hear Canada, because you guys, I mean, a whole country going. I mean, you're just in Quebec, obviously, but do you coordinate on a national level? Do you just focus on your local things as far as education?
Well, our CMP was in charge of putting the federal legislation educational program first, so it's available online for all law enforcement. Actually, so it's up and running now that for actually the major change in the federal level. On the provincial level, we are right in the middle of it now, still struggling to put in place some new educational programs and stuff. So actually, yeah, we're into it. So and we're planning to be able to educate all our law enforcement not before 2019 late. So unfortunately, I'm pretty sure, like I heard for a while, some officers on the street will probably turn their head away because it's maybe too complicated now to apply the law because they don't master it. But we'll have to deal with that issues as it comes.
Glenn, you talked a little bit about education, and I know Colorado Department of Transportation does great work with educating drivers in Colorado. What has been you guys' focus as far as marijuana and education and drivers? What have you guys really tried to accomplish?
We go to more of an awareness model. Our budget for marijuana awareness driving is 3 times what our entire budget is for alcohol. And we have to really look at our audience. With its alcohol, it's based on fear of arrest. With the people that use cannabis, it's responsibility. And it's also getting at those unique audiences of where they consume and getting them in the right place. And it's doing survey work. Again, some people think they drive better, some don't believe the science behind it, but it's getting those relationships, and it's coming up with something new and fresh every year.
Now, I serve as a moderator, but I'm trying to learn as well while I'm here, and it's great to have you guys here. And as Lieutenant Howard talked about, we worked together on some education campaigns specifically around home grows. And I'm curious, I'll turn it back over to Sacramento with you, Greg. Have you guys done any home grow education? I mean, maybe you could teach us a few things we can learn from you.
Yeah, we've tried to push out a media blitz on like what neighbors can look for of what it's indicative of signs of an indoor grow. We try and target almost probably about 95% of our indoor grows are all Asian. So we try and target our Asian population. We actually have 2 zip codes that make up almost all of our grows. So we do a lot of outreach to those communities and try and do a lot of education to them as to what the indoor grow, how many plants they can have, and then again what the fines are if they don't comply. And then through our school resource officers, we do a ton of marijuana education and all that. But for primarily indoor grows, it's a lot of educating of just the community meetings and what to look for, and then when they think it's a grow, who do they let know? Because our dispatch center doesn't really do anything with those calls. So we as well have had to figure out how to get those routed to our marijuana compliance teams, and then we start looking at their power records and stuff.
Well, we're just about out of time. I want to give anyone on the panel, if there's something you think we might have missed that you think you want to make sure a message or some information you want to pass to our guests here. Anyone on the panel have anything else?
Have a good flight.
All right. Well, thank you all for attending. We really appreciate you coming to Denver, and keep an eye out for that survey. We'll be coming to you soon, all right?